Hello, folks. It's that time of year again. Halloween is at our doorsteps, and so are those eerie and unsettling experiences sent in by our listeners. So lock your doors, draw the shades, light a candle, grab yourself a drink, and throw another log on that fire. 'Cause tonight, it's storytelling time. Story 1. Hello, Rusty. My name is Parker, and my wife and I lived in an old creaky farmhouse for years in southern Oregon. I don't know much about the history of the place, but I do know it was built sometime in the late 1800s, and the previous owners moved unexpectedly before we bought her. Nothing strange, I thought. I'm sure it happens all the time for a number of reasons. But it wasn't until our dog Bowser went missing that our everyday existence began to unravel. We searched high and low for weeks, hoping he would turn up. Well, about 3 weeks later, it was our two cats that disappeared as well, seemingly overnight. They were indoors only, and we always kept the windows and doors closed at all times for that very reason. Well, every day felt heavier without 'em. I tried to convince myself that they had just wandered off. My wife agreed, but a gnawing dread settled in my gut. Finally, the day came when we decided to move. As we cleared out the basement, I stumbled upon a trapdoor, hidden behind some old boxes that I hadn't noticed before. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight as I pried her open, revealing a narrow, dark crawl space beneath. I leaned in, the musty air thick around me. I shone my light inside the crawl space, and my breath hitched. There, curled together in eternal sleep, were Bowser and the cats. They were intact, but their eyes seemed to hold a depth of sorrow that froze me in my place. A chilling realization washed over me. They'd been trapped here the entire time, unwanted remnants of our life, hidden away in a space that felt too sinister to belong to a home. I stumbled back, eyes wide, as a wave of guilt crashed over me. My wife had a similar reaction. Before I could yell, though, an icy wind swept through the basement, and I slammed that trapdoor shut, sealing their memory away. Eventually, we did the right thing, and buried them in the woods behind the house. But as we drove away, I could almost hear their soft cries echoing in the distance, begging not to be forgotten. And they never will be. That's my story, Rusty. Kinda spooky. What do your listeners think? Thanks, Rusty. The Parkers. Hi, Rusty. Name's Scott. I'm an avid jogger, and every other morning I'm up at the crack of dawn, putting my miles in. I've been doing this for years, and up until this point, I've never had any issues. That was until last September. It was a crisp autumn morning when I decided to take my usual jog through the wooded trail near my house, just outside of Boulder, Colorado. The sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows that danced as I moved. About halfway through my route, though, I noticed something odd. At first, it was a feeling, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck that made my skin crawl. Then I spotted it. A dark figure darting from tree to tree, moving perfectly in sync with me. How could anything move like that? I thought to myself. It leaped gracefully, as if gravity had no power over it. My adrenaline pumped as I picked up the pace. Each time I cast a backward glance, the figure was closer, its silhouette growing more distant amidst the foliage. It seemed to mock my efforts to escape, appearing just at the edge of my peripheral vision before vanishing again. It did this over and over. With fear tightening my grip, I found myself in a dead sprint, urging my legs to carry me home. But it was no use, I could feel it behind me, an invisible predator toying with its prey. Just as I neared the trailhead, the figure emerged onto the path, blocking my escape. Well, in that split second I braced for impact, then fell onto the ground when it leaped into the air, crashing through the trees above me. And when I looked back, I saw nothing. Only the empty trail and the oppressive silence that enveloped the forest. All of my fears burst forth as I raced home, the creeping dread never leaving my sight. I knew what I had seen deep down, and I knew that nobody would understand. I also knew that whatever had followed me had left a shadow that would linger far longer than that day. I still see it from time to time, but my routes have changed, and they've become much shorter. I also carry protection when I'm out there. Well, that's my experience, Rusty. Thank you for sharing, Scott. Story 3. It was supposed to be a simple road trip along Interstate 5, but ended up turning my little world upside down. Here's how my experience played out as I remember it just last fall. The sun hung low in the sky as the miles rolled away beneath my tires. With nothing but my thoughts for company, I welcomed the solitude, until I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror a few hours into the trip. It was small at first, just a flicker of light dancing in the darkening sky above me. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just a star of my imagination playing tricks on me. But ever so often I noticed it, a tiny orb that seemed to shift positions, always keeping pace as I drove. Hours rolled on by, yet it followed, until I stopped for gas at the next Valero. As I poured the fuel, the Eerie light hovered just beyond the range of the gas station lights, pulsating as if it were alive. What in the hell was it? And every time I asked somebody else to join me to observe the strange object, it would disappear, as if only meant for my eyes. Anxious but curious, I climbed back into the truck and took off again. But the moment I hit the road, the light zoomed in closer, almost teasingly. It leaped ahead, vanished for a second, then reappeared right above my car, even more closer, bathing me in an otherworldly glow. In moments of clarity, dread washed over me. This wasn't some cosmic coincidence. It was intentional, a relentless pursuit across the highway. Every time I stopped or sped away, it matched my movements, the light morphing from a friendly glimmer to a harbinger of something I couldn't comprehend. By the time night fell completely, the sky exploded with stars, but I couldn't focus on them. No, my eyes were locked into that haunting object, carving arcane symbols into the night, urging me to follow it. I didn't know where it would lead, but some primal instinct deep inside told me that if I didn't escape, well, I might learn things no human was meant to know. So I did what made sense. I floored it, tires screeching, leaving that accursed light behind. I drove through the night, adrenaline pumping through my veins, vowing never to embrace the open road alone again, because sometimes the light you chase leads to places you're not meant to find. Thank you, Ty the Trucker. Story 4. Good evening, Rusty. I've been a long-time subscriber of your channel, and your stories never cease to amaze me. Well, I've got one for you, about a mask that I found randomly in town. Or perhaps it found me. Well, here it goes. I'll never forget the day I found that mask. It was an ordinary October afternoon, leaves crunching beneath my feet as I strolled through the park. I was trying to escape the mundane noise of homework and looming exams. But that's when I saw it, a grotesque Halloween mask, lying abandoned on a weathered wooden bench. Its features were twisted and exaggerated. The eyes of it bulged outward unnaturally, and the mouth was stretched into a perpetual grimace, revealing yellow fangs. I shivered at the sight. I thought about picking it up, but something made me hesitate. It just felt wrong and unsettling. I turned away, deciding it was best to ignore it and move on. Well, days passed, and I forced myself to focus on school. Well, on a whim, I decided to return to that park. To my surprise, the mask was still there, sitting on the bench as if waiting for me. The world around it felt eerily still, as if nature held its breath. Something compelled me to reach for it. I picked it up, feeling the cold plastic against my skin. I studied it, and despite its repulsiveness, I felt an inexplicable thrill rushing over me. Halloween was just around the corner, and I figured wearing something unique might give me a chance to stand out at the school party I was going to later that night. Well, as I slipped the mask back into my backpack, another shiver ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. I had more important things to think about. Well, the night of the party arrived, and excitement mixed with apprehension buzzed in the air. I transformed myself into the ultimate Halloween freak, donning the mask atop of my head as I joined my friends. Laughter and music pulsated all around me. But at the same time, I felt a chill follow me everywhere I went. At first, the mask attracted attention. People were drawn to it, marveling at its detail and creepiness. But soon something shifted. A sense of dread took hold. I stumbled through the evening, watching as my luck spiraled downward. My phone, my lifeline to my friends and the world around me, suddenly died, slicing me off from social media and text messages. As I fumbled to recharge it, a shadowy figure lurked across the room. I shook my head and dismissed it as a trick of light and maybe a couple beers. But that unease lingered throughout the night. Then, on my way to grab drinks, I bumped into someone hard. I turned to apologize, but froze. It was that same shadow I had seen moments before. At that very second, the power cut out, plunging the room into complete darkness and silence that followed. Well, as you might expect, the other partygoers protested. But that's when the realization hit me. Each event, each dreadful encounter, coincided with the mask. The mask wasn't just a prop. It was alive with something unearthly, tethered to misfortune. I felt its dark energy coiling around me, tightening like a noose. Panic surged within me, and I didn't stop to think. I just rushed home, breathless, with the mask heavy in my backpack, as if it were dragging me behind. Clutching it, I shoved it into the fireplace, flames crackling eagerly. The heat turned the mask black. I expected fireworks, a grand explosion of evil. But all I got was an ethereal plume of smoke that twisted and spiraled until it completely vanished into the night's darkness. I don't know what to make of my experience, Rusty, but this gives credence to the theory that certain objects seem to hold a power to their own. I am now a firm believer that cursed objects do exist. Thanks for sharing my story, and happy Halloween to ya, Amber. Story 5. When I first set foot in that ramshackle house in the outskirts of Maine, the lingering smell of damp wood and stagnant air hit me like a brick. The owners, a couple who'd long lost their spark, had called an exterminator, me, because they were being bitten awake at night, their skin speckled with tiny red dots. Ticks, they said, were infesting every room. But what hung heavy in the air was more than just the scent of decay. It was the palpable weight of something deeply wrong. The carpet squished beneath my feet, the echoes of my footsteps swallowed by layers of dust and neglect. I started with the living room, where the dim light struggled to penetrate the grimy windows. It was then I noticed the clothes strewn carelessly about. Old jackets and faded jeans, as if some tragedy had cast them aside in a rush. The couple kept avoiding eye contact, shifting nervously as I moved through their home. "Quote unquote, you'll find them in the attic," the husband muttered, his voice shaky, as though the word alone summoned unseen horrors. A chill prickled along my spine at the mention of it, but I refocused on my task, armed with sprays and traps that seemed woefully inadequate for the dread that loomed in the house. When I finally took the creaky stairs to the attic, the air grew thick and stale, coating my lungs with a musty layer. I flipped on a mask and continued. My flashlight flickered over the uneven floorboards before landing on a ghastly sight. Carcasses, tiny matted fur and discolored flesh, were haphazardly trapped in cobwebs that draped corners like forgotten phantoms. My mind raced as I stumbled back at the gruesome sight. The ticks were not the problem. The creeping decay of this place held a much darker secret. A haunting tableau of twisted animal remains gnawed at my sanity, beneath which lay remnants of ragged clothing, suggesting something more sinister had occurred there. Just as the unease began to settle around my body like a vice, I was jolted by a whisper that slipped through the gnarled wood, chilling me to my core. It was the sound of movement, a rustle, soft and wet, something shifting in the shadows around me. I bolted, barely pausing to gather my tools, the fear of what I might discover propelling me down that staircase in a wild frenzy. Well, my last memory of that house is of the couple's wide eyes watching me leave, a knowing dread that something was irreparable. My colleagues don't know where I went that night, but I have never mustered the courage to return. Sometimes I can still smell that place in my nightmares, a reminder of what awaits, hungering in the dark corners of that forsaken place. You couldn't pay me enough to go back. That's it. Thank you for sharing my story, Rusty. Charles. And there you have it. So whether you're out celebrating or just staying in, watching scary movies and handing out candy, have yourselves a safe Halloween, and you'll be hearing from me soon. Good night.